A deadly explosion last month in New York City has prompted new concerns about natural gas pipelines. The dangers of aging pipelines had already drawn the attention of Ed Markey as well as environmental advocates with the Conservation Law Foundation. More recently, the CLF came out with a map showing where the signs of trouble are most alarming, and some of the locations are under the streets of Boston. We'd like to welcome as our guest from CLF, the staff attorney, Shanna. Thank you very much for being with us, Shanna.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start from the recent past here with what happened in Harlem. What did that tell us?
Well, part of what it tells us is that our infrastructure doesn't get nearly enough attention. Natural gas pipelines are running beneath literally all of our streets, and very few people actually pay attention to that or have any idea that that's the case. So one thing that it's really put on the map for us is that we need to create better public awareness around the existence of these pipelines, the age of these pipelines. As you know, the one in Harlem was from the 1800s. We have a lot of pipeline here in Massachusetts that's from the 1850s and 60s and 70s. So it really brought the need to update our infrastructure into focus.
Well, we haven't had anything here lately, at least, of that scale, whether we're talking about buildings or the number of people killed, but we do know about leaks.
We do. We know that there are roughly 20,000 leaks throughout the state of Massachusetts, and we actually have 21,000 miles of natural gas pipeline running underneath the state of Massachusetts. If you think about that, it's really mind-boggling. I mean, that's almost enough pipeline to encircle the earth, and it's all crammed right here into Massachusetts. Over a third of that pipeline is actually what's considered by the utilities to be leak-prone pipeline, and that means it's cast iron, or it's a type of steel that hasn't been protected from leakage. And so the companies know and have been working on trying to replace some of this pipeline, but there are some regulatory disincentives to doing it in as quick of a fashion as we'd like to see.
We'll talk about the leaks themselves. Is just any leak at all something that you have to be sort of uniformly upset about and concerned about, or are some leaks worse than others?
Some leaks are definitely worse than others, and what we always try to tell the public is that if you smell gas, if you think you smell gas, call your gas company immediately, because we don't want the public trying to make that determination on their own. But there are different grades of leaks. There are 3 different grades of leaks. Grade 1 is considered the most hazardous, and that's considered at possible risk of an imminent explosion. And so the companies deal with those very quickly once they detect them. Grade 2 is a type of leak that may not be leaking out as much gas in terms of volume, or it may not be in an area where it could leak into an enclosed space and cause an explosion, but it's got the potential to do that. And so those leaks are generally monitored over time, and if there seems to be an issue, then they'll come back and take a look at those.
Of course, the other problem here is, even if there's no explosion, you have these greenhouse gases that are just wafting into the air. How big a problem is that?
It's a huge problem because methane is actually over 34 times more powerful than carbon dioxide on a 100-year time frame. It's closer to 80 times more powerful than carbon dioxide on a 20-year time frame. And so when we took a look at the range of methane that was leaking out of our pipelines here in Massachusetts, we found that it could be as much as 4% of our entire greenhouse gas inventory for the state.
Now, you mentioned regulatory problems here, because I know when pipelines get old, they deteriorate. That's to be expected. But what's the regulatory factor?
Well, there are a couple. One is that the companies right now are able to pass through the costs of any gas that goes up into the air to the customers. So you're paying for that gas that's been bought and put on the system, whether or not it makes it to your home or it's leaked into the air. So that's one issue, and Senator Markey's actually proposed some legislation to deal with that. The other issue is that we have a very large amount of this leak-prone pipe on the system, and there are concerns about ratepayer shock if we go and replace those pipelines. But on the other hand, we've got public safety, which is a huge factor, and then we've got the climate issues surrounding it.
Well, you have legislation that's working its way through the State House right now. What would that do?
That's right, and it's a very good legislation that's going through Massachusetts right now. It would actually produce uniform classifications for the leaks from company to company. It would also require repair of grade 1 and grade 2 leaks on a specific timeline. We're pushing right now to get grade 3 leaks included in that as well. And one of the other pieces that it would do is allow all of the gas utilities to go to the Department of Public Utilities to get accelerated replacement programs put in place.
Now, what does that mean? You get an accelerated program put in place. It does sound that on the one hand, the benefit is you get things fixed and the system's safer, but you know, there's a bill for that, I suppose, right?
There is, and so the DPU has been very conscious of that and has put caps on the existing programs that are out there for replacing the pipes. I think one of the things that will be revisited if this legislation passes, is how much the ratepayers can bear in terms of replacing this pipe. It's important to know that the current programs, even at the height of the winter season when people are using the most gas that they use all year, the current cost for the National Grid program at its height was $1.95 a month. So, you know, it's over the entire system. It can cost hundreds of millions of dollars, but in terms of spreading that out among all the ratepayers, it can be a really bargain price for what we're getting.
Well, one thing we've seen recently around the research here are these maps showing where the leaks are, and not only just leaks in general, but the ones that are the most urgently threatening here. So what's the benefit of putting that on a map?
Well, I think part of it is kind of making these leaks visible. As you and I talked about, people just don't think about the gas pipeline infrastructure that's running under their sidewalks. And so we wanted to make sure that people understood the scope of this problem, that there are literally thousands of leaks, and there's probably a leak in your neighborhood or near your office. So what we did was we took the DPU data that had been submitted by the utilities, and we were only able to get about 4,500 of the leaks that we know are out there, out of 20,000, to put on the map. And it shows you, from grade 1, which is the most hazardous, to grade 3, that these leaks are everywhere, and there's something that we all need to be thinking about, and we need to be reporting to our gas company if we smell gas.
Now, another concern in the legislation here in Massachusetts is about possible expansion of pipelines, and more people are using natural gas. Mm-hmm. But in the legislation, it says you want that expansion to somehow be in line with mandates around climate change. Explain how that would work.
Certainly. Well, one of the things that people have really been pushing for as gas prices have been low is the expansion of natural gas, not just pipelines for distribution companies, but also for power plants. And in this legislation, they were proposing to expand the natural gas distribution system without having any explicit reference to the climate mandates that we have in place. The Global Warming Solutions Act was passed in 2008 and requires us to make very ambitious reductions in our greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. So the language that we're proposing would require the department to ensure that any expansion programs can be in compliance with the Global Warming Solutions Act.
So does that mean putting into place some incentives to use other forms of energy, renewable energy, for example?
Primarily what it means is actually taking a look at what the greenhouse gas impacts would be from the particular expansion. When you're looking at switching someone from using oil heat to using natural gas or to using a renewable type of thermal heating system like a heat pump, we want them to actually quantify what the benefits are for the different types of fuel switching.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
From the Conservation Law Foundation, Shanna Cleveland. We'll have more news in just a moment.